All right, so the two big overreaching categories are intrinsic relationships and extrinsic relationships. These are $10 terms. Hey, you know, writing this for tenure, damn it. Can't use a 2-syllable word when a 3-syllable word. Yeah, hyphenated words are always. Anyway, intrinsic relationships are the ones that we're all most familiar with. And if you look down the list here, I'll just go through them. Just to define them, they don't depend upon context. They're easier to observe. Sometimes they're not that easy. I've got 5 categories. The first one is the most obvious one, the rhythmic relationship between music and dance. Could either do with accent and meter. Accent patterns in the score, whether metrical or syncopated, are parallel by a corresponding movement accent. Now, this isn't always direct, of course. Sometimes it's skewed. Sometimes it's not as obvious as a jump every downbeat or something like that. But I think we all know when a rhythmic relationship exists. For the most part, yeah.
What do you mean by accent pattern?
Accent pattern, I mean pattern of downbeats and strong and weak beats. Like in 4/4 times strong, weak, medium, weak.
Well, I was thinking of accent as a symbol in the it's an accent.
Right. An accent is an accent.
So metric grouping.
Yeah, metric grouping. Yeah, accent pattern metric grouping, same thing, I guess. Like certain time signatures have certain metric groupings, patterns of accent.
And if a particular metric grouping can receive a special accent.
True.
The whole thing.
Right. And there's something I call movement score integration, another fancy term, but it happens quite a lot where the dance itself actually provides a sound. And I can give an example of that in the green table if we get around to it, where the dancers make a sound that's an integrated part of the score.
Yes. One more question. Why are you afraid that everybody is? I'm just going to, this is a loaded question.
Yeah.
I can't understand why people are so chicken about using the word noise. It's a noise of that. It's not a sound. It's
Yeah.
scientifically a noise.
Yeah.
Why can't we do that? Why are we so afraid to say that?
Because
you can get arrested for making noise. But
Yeah. You get arrested for making music too. I almost was.
I don't think there's enough people being arrested for
That's a good point. Yeah.
But it is a sound.
Yeah.
It is go back to your notion that it doesn't have that context.
Yeah. Well,
What you're trying to say.
it will become clearer when I get to the other category. So
The
extrinsic, yeah. So can we just leave that question until we get to the? Okay. Yeah, I know. You probably have. I hope you have lots of questions. All right, the dynamic relationship. That's another one that's fairly obvious. Now, volume of the musical gesture matched by the size of the choreographic gesture. And I've worked this a long time. I said usually occurring as part of another choreo-musical correspondence. That's my fancy term. Another fancy term: choreo-musical relationships, relationships between music and dance. Most of these intrinsic relationships happen in concert. I mean, often we'll see a dynamic and a rhythmic relationship taking place at the same time. It's not as if they're discrete and individual and used autonomously. You often see them used together, so it's a natural occurrence. Next category is textural relationships, and this is kind of a bigger one. Instrumental versus choreographic forces. In other words, the number of instruments and dancers are roughly equivalent. This is one that Balanchine uses a lot, those of you know Balanchine's work. Solo instrument with solo dancer, duet with pas de, etc. A lot of choreographers use this. John?
But what do you mean by duet?
2 dancers.
Oh, I thought you meant musical duet. You say a duet.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. In this context, I mean a duet, 2 instruments with a pas de deux.
That's awfully sophisticated. I don't think that one dancer, a choreographer, when you listen whether it's a duet or not, they don't know if it's a trio, duet.
Yeah.
They really don't.
Many don't, but some do.
I don't think it's very common. In fact, I've never seen a version's a pas de deux. I've never seen a pas de deux that wasn't fully accompanied by an emotion.
it. Yeah, that's a good point. But I'll show you John, I'll show you a section in Agon where that happens.
Well, it's very liberal.
Yeah, yeah. Most of,
Very proud of that.
yeah, I should
Quite
explain.
exceptional.
In my book, I do 6 analyses, and 3 of them are Stravinsky-Balanchine. Then I talk about homophonic or polyphonic affinities. Choreography reflects the degree of homophony or polyphony in the score. I think I have an example of that. Counterpoint, of course, we all know about counterpoint relationships. Sometimes they're too obvious. I see a lot of MFA students in high school, whenever there's a fugal entry in the music that they're using, of course, they match one dancer at each line in the fugue. It's pretty predictable. Great exercise, yeah. Structural correspondences having to do with either small or medium or large scale units of structure. Then what I call qualitative correspondences. This is kind of a loose category. Correspondences of tessitura. In other words, the degree of highness or lowness of a passage of music is sometimes matched choreographically in some way. Timbral parallels. This is another Balanchine trick. A parallel established between dancer, a group of dancers, and some group of instruments.
Excuse me, Paul, where do musical forms fit in? Is this structural too? Like ABA form?
Yeah, that would be under like larger structures. Yeah, it's all part of structural parallelism. Timbral relationships are often sex-based. Again, in Balanchine you see that a lot. Men equals brass, women equals woodwinds. He does that quite a lot. Sharpness and smoothness, staccato or legato passages in the music are reflected by either sustained or sharp movements. Consonance and dissonance. This is one that I find every once in a while, but maybe you see it more often than I do. Level of dissonance or consonance in the music's harmonic language is choreographic knowledge. Then I have a category of mimetic parallels, and these are kind of interesting. These pop up all over the place. The first category is instrumental imitation, where a dancer actually mimes an instrument. I'm going to show you a passage from Orpheus where that happens. And often the sound in the score is not what you would expect to hear, especially in Balanchine. Like when Orpheus strums the lyre, you don't necessarily hear the harp playing, but sometimes it is literal. And the second category there is non-instrumental imitation, where a dancer mimes some sort of movement that you would associate with a sound, and you hear something in the score that provides the parallel. I don't have an example of that, but if anybody knows Parade, you know, where there's that gunshot. Yeah, there are a lot of things in Parade that do that, actually, a lot of events. Okay. Now we get to extrinsic, the highfalutin category. And these relationships really depend on a pre-knowledge on the audience's part. We were talking about this yesterday, where we were the prejudice piece. That often it's unsafe now to assume that your audience is going to come in with the required amount of cultural literacy to know what you're referring to. But you see it in a lot of dance. And I've got 3 categories there. First being archetypal, music theme, texture, or instrumentation, and a corresponding movement phrase or vocabulary associated with archetypes, archetypal characters of themes or situations. Green Table is an excellent example of that, where it's not so much a story being told as archetypes being presented, things that we recognize in both music and choreography.
Is this the Jungian archetypal? That's what you're thinking of specifically?
Not so much that as just images that we associate with a type rather than a specific story or a specific person. Like the Green Table has characters called the profiteer, and situations called the brothel, which are not supposed to, it's not a specific story that we're being told, but we all have preconceptions about these characters and situations.
I guess my question is, doesn't include non-Western then?
That's a good question. I just confine myself to looking at these 6 choreographies for fits. I should warn you that at the outset. I have no idea how this works with anything other than the 6 choreographies. I've done it with, I've applied this paradigm to other choreographies, but not with non-Western style. So yeah, that's a good question.
Could you tell us right now what the 6 were?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to do that. The 6 choreographies that I analyze in this book are the 3 biggies by Stravinsky and Balanchine, where in each case I tried to pick a piece where I knew collaboration happened between composer and choreographer. As I wanted that to be a given. You know, I didn't want to look at a piece where, you know, the choreographer took some pre-existing piece of music. I wanted collaborative pieces in each case. So I picked Apollo, Orpheus, and Agon from Stravinsky and Balanchine, and then Errand into the Maze, Martha Graham and Giancarlo Menotti.
Whoa.
Sorry, okay. Did I not give you a handout? No, I guess I did. Sorry, yeah, Errand into the Maze. Errand into the Maze. I'll write these down if you like. See, I wrote down because I want you all to buy the book.
It's a teaser.
We have Apollo, Orpheus, and Agon. These are all Stravinsky and Balanchine. Apollo's what, 1927, 28? Orpheus is 48. Agon is 1957. Then Errand into the Maze. From the late 40s, I believe 46, 47, that's Martha Graham and the composer Giancarlo Menotti. When was that? 46, I think. 47, I think. 46. The Green Table. And that's Kyrgios and Fritz Kohn, F.A. Kohn. John, you could probably tell me the year of that one. It's the early 30s, isn't it?
Yes, I know, the Paris competition, they won the prize.
32.
Hold on. Yeah, 31 or 32.
Okay. Somewhere in there. I've got it. And Billy the Kid. Copeland and Loring. I felt a certain pressure from the hometown team to include Billy the Kid because E.G. Loring is the founder of our dance group. It's a great piece, of course, but yeah.
Once again, going for tenure.
Every little bit helps, you know. 1938. Yeah, 1938. And I guess I can talk a little bit about these now, about my research into them. I did a lot of mucking around in different libraries to find out how the collaborative process worked in each case. It's kind of hard to do, because like us, these people didn't really write down the process. And really, for the most part, it was other people talking after the fact who gave the most information about the process in each case. So the information I got was piecemeal, but I was able to establish that in each case there was a really strong collaborative process going on. There's a really good tape of, it's not transcribed, I don't think, of Vera Stravinsky talking about how Stravinsky and Balanchine worked on Agon. And I think Balanchine flew out to California and worked in Stravinsky's studio. And they would literally lock themselves up in the studio for 12 hours a day, every day. I think this went on for a week or more. And she could hear them shouting and screaming in there and dancing. She'd hear thumps and things breaking. She didn't know what was going on. And every day they'd walk out and they'd have these huge smiles on their faces. These big smiles. And they wouldn't tell her anything. They just said, we did a lot today. And then they go back the next day and the same thing would happen. And after that, Balanchine went back to New York and they wrote letters, but that was about it. And about 4 or 5 months later, Agon was born. So I found little bits and pieces of information like that in each case about the working process. So I was able to establish that yes, these people work together pretty assiduously. Okay, back to my relationships here.
I have a question about,
Yeah.
You've looked at these 6, and you said you've looked at some other pieces too, and I was wondering how well your paradigm holds up in dances where there wasn't a collaboration, or where the composer and the choreographer purposely didn't work together.
Right,
such as
good
Cunningham
question,
and Cage.
yeah. In that case, it works negatively, like it works, it anti-works. If you look at like Cage Cunningham, then you're going to see non-correspondences or accidental correspondences. But we found that in that case, the paradigm helped in
But also-
defining what they weren't doing, you know?
But the eye picks up the correspondence. It's like a flash, one of those flashing light things where it goes with all music, because your eye sees what goes with the music.
Right.
So you would make those.
Yeah, I mean, try as we might, we can't ignore correspondences when they happen, even accidentally. You know? And you certainly see them even in Cage Cunningham pieces when the music and movement do something together. Or
Your
relate
next
to
book.
something. What's that? Yeah.
For your next book.
Right. No, this is my last book.
Just the paradigm probably works fine if the music precedes the dance. So the choreo, I mean, like for instance, Balanchine had 4 temperaments, 6 years on his shelf before he eventually got to do it. So I'm thinking that, and there is a pretty literal relationship between music and dance there somewhat. So there it works because of his, I guess that's better.
Yeah, I mean, it probably works fine in non-collaborative pieces too. That's just a limitation I set myself in this particular book. Yeah.
And Paul, I taught a course that similar to the one that you described, the full journal, only using tonal music. Obviously, it was all pre-existent before the choreographers even thought of. And I've rethought my course in light of these paradigms, and I think they're excellent in terms of
thank you.
describing traditional and non-traditional ways of using tonal music. And so I think you can abstract any of these ideas and apply them to basically any dance.
Correct.
Find ways. I have one question on the extrinsic to force you back into.
Sure, great.
Um,
Do that.
It's one area that I deal with a lot in my comp classes is the area of connotative elements in music. Where does that fit in? I'm not sure.
Like describe what you would mean.
We were talking about this at the table. The soloist would do Beethoven's Ninth, for instance. There's a strict connotation that's being played with, or to use a Woody Guthrie score, very abstract dance. Those kinds of conflicts.
Yeah, that's a limitation of this paradigm. It really doesn't discuss those kind of elements. The only, in the way that that's for where is he? The next guy, Joe.
Oh, okay.
The only thing that my paradigm would deal with is it would call Beethoven's Ninth with a soloist. It would be an obvious textual contrast, you know, symphony versus soloist. But there are obviously more subtle things going on there probably that the paradigm would deal with. Yeah, yeah. It's not the the ultimate solution to all relationships.
Well, don't hurt yourself, because you talk about here audience's pre-knowledge of pertinent sociological.
Yeah, it could be that it would be covered by an extrinsic relationship that I haven't thought up.
Yeah.
You know, you can think of. Yeah. Please expand on this. Anyway, have I covered all? No.
Become a time-lapse series.
Yeah, right. Please, no. The next category of extrinsic relationship then is something I called emotional/psychological. It's not a very good heading, but it's all I can think of. Score and choreography reflect the emotional and/or the psychological state of an individual character or group of characters. Aaron into the Maze is full of that. If any of you know that piece, it's all about angst. But in an inimitable grand way. Yeah.
I just wanted to know, they told me that she did the steps first.
To Aaron?
Yeah. And then they wrote it, isn't that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure about exactly how they collaborated. I read a little bit about it. I know that she gave him counting instructions. I read that.
Almost inevitably, though, with Martha's work, I mean, I know this from working there for years, is that often she would give a very specific script to a composer, and sometimes she would show steps to him. But nearly always, when she received the score, she would completely rework what she'd already done.
Yeah,
To fit the score. I mean, that was
especially
just
at
a
this
way.
point in her career, I just did a whole past semester, spent a whole semester researching Martha's
Oh, right.
work, the evolution of her work. And at this period,
knew this would happen, you know, people would give me great suggestions. Oh, well. It's too late. The next category I have then is narrative. That's probably the most obvious extrinsic category where the music and the dance both tell a story. Orpheus being a great example of that, where Stravinsky is referring not only to elements of the myth, like the lyre playing, but also previous retellings of the myth. Like the Stravinsky score bears a lot of resemblance to the Monteverdi score. For those of you who know the Stravinsky score, there's a lot of things, I won't go into it, but there's a lot of things that are obviously referring back to Monteverdi's Orfeo. And Balanchine does a lot of things, that both obvious and subtle, that of course refer to the story. It's not a straight telling of the story, but there are a lot of wonderful little subtle touches in the choreography, the downward movement during the bereavement scene, kind of so you know he's going to go down. You had a question?
Yeah, now my question is back to the notion of content. I guess my question kind of comes because I've been working with Cunningham dancers, or they're ilk for a while. And, you know, I know that some dancers would think of the notion of context in movement as being something that comes from the vocabulary of movement itself. That's not a literary or word-associated additional layer. So, in a sense, that supposition of dividing it into two categories that are based on some kind of literary contextual idea is I mean, there's, I think a lot of movement people, a large body of movement people would have a hard time just making that kind of.
Yeah, I admit there are limitations to dividing it this way, and it is kind of based on a literary critical model. But I figured, well, the best place to start is with pre-existing models and to build outward from there. Yeah. Stravinsky, interestingly enough, said that with this great dance composer, he said that music isn't expressible.
Yeah,
It doesn't express anything other than itself. Of course, Stravinsky, we know, was a great liar. He often lied about his sources and everything else, so whether or not he really believed that, who knows. Anyway, that's the paradigm, and if there are no other questions, I'll show some examples now that what I did was I didn't follow through. I betrayed myself a little bit because when I finally got into the analyses, I didn't constantly apply the paradigm. I played a little bit more loosely with it, which is probably a good idea. I didn't want it to really bind me, limit me. So I tried to find instances in each case where I couldn't define what was going on. I figured, oh, what the hell? I might as well put it in anyway. The paradigm doesn't cover this part of this choreography, but something is going on here. So I tried to prove that it had limitations too. Let's look first at Agon. These ones.
Size of instrumentation and the number of dancers.
Yes, and that's something that perhaps if you just saw this for the first time, it wouldn't be as apparent. But as you watch it, you realize that it happens a lot. Good. And something else related to that?
The texture, when there were textural changes and the imitation suggestion of imitation or conversation in the instruments, it happened in the dance too.
There's counterpoint in both movement and score, but they're not exactly alike. No. Balanchine rarely does align his choreographic counterpoint with musical counterpoint. They'll happen at roughly the same times, but there'll always be differences. He'll always gets with it. What else?
But there's definitely metric relationship.
Rhythmic, yeah. Once again, sometimes they're exact, sometimes not. You always get the feel that we're in the same rhythmic universe together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes with the homophonic texture, we saw, even though it was asymmetrical, we saw sort of a unison movement, where it tends to kind of use the chorus in moments of collectively agreed movement to the sound at times departed from the counterpoint. They were kind of, the sound was sort of in chorus too.
Okay.
It was like, just there's a contrasting element to the counterpoint.
Right.
The moments when they'd be in agreement and the music would be in agreement too.
Yeah.
I think we kind of touched upon this, but just to say the one that captured my attention most was the canonic gains, the stretto.
Yeah.
Music versus that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really jumps out at you first time.
And then I saw that when, like the dynamic part of it, where when the music got louder, the movement got bigger, with the exception of at the end, where
Big
towards the
swings.
end, Yeah,
Yeah.
where they were doing the downstage in unison, doing the downstage movement, fairly big movement, but the music was not otherwise.
Yeah, you get the eighth note triplets. Music gets more expansive, but it's not loud.
No.
Yeah.
Where would energies fall within this paradigm? Because I certainly felt the same type of energy.
Well, or I was gonna say formality, the formality of an opening.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one that,
Different than energy.
that I can cover that, yeah.
Gwen asked it again.
Yeah, energy's a good one. That's a
I
good
think
question. I don't know.
Size, dynamics.
Yeah, it's not covered
Dancers
very
use
well by the dynamics
differently
category, I
than
agree.
musicians do. We mustn't use that word as though it meant the same thing to them.
That's a really important point, because when a dancer talks of energy, it's not the same thing
Yeah.
as when a musician talks of dynamic. I've found that out the hard way many
Me
times.
too, me too.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that one that isn't quite satisfactorily answered here.
One
But-
thing you
but-
did touch on though, oh, sorry, is just the use of the brass instruments corresponding.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That's another thing that isn't obvious to a first-time viewer, but as the piece progresses, it becomes more obvious that the brass instruments, in general, are associated with men. Yeah.
Well, a lot of this, late Stravinsky is static harmonica, and he keeps it a semblance of movement, it's not real harmonica. And, but the Donna machine, I won't say matches it, but he depicts somewhat that staticness by keeping the two outer boys. Is this the opening?
Yeah.
And the line.
He keeps them almost in line, so it's an enclosed thing that doesn't seem to travel, well, they're quite active. But doesn't balance seem move well, make them move well.
Now, that's a wonderful observation, John. I'm ashamed I never noticed that.
But they do it's not very, there's not much movement.
Yeah,
Instruments
you're right. So one.
Spatial movement.
One of the,
Spatial movement.
one of the most obvious ones is how you handle the VCR. There are definitely sectional relationships. Here, two dancers are entering, and we're getting into literally the next section of
Yeah.
the dance.
And if you know this piece, it's very sectionalized, and the sections always overlap. One is ending as the next one begins.
One of the things I believe that they were arguing about was that Stravinsky, who wrote Agon while he was writing The Rake's Progress, which is his last truly traditional piece,
Yeah.
because after that he moves away very fast from the music that he's been writing. I think he really wanted to write something for Balanchine that was much more outside of his traditional
Yeah.
kind of writing. Balanchine didn't want him to. I think this is one of the things that they're arguing about. But there's that sense of the music is traditional, the dancing that we're seeing is also, in a sense, traditional too. So there's a kind of an agreement of style.
Yeah. Oh,
You know what I'm saying?
related to that, I should add that there is an extrinsic thing at work here that a lot of people forget when they watch Egon, and that is that they were using as their sort of their choreographic inspiration the 17th century dancing treatise. What was it called? Apologie de la Danse,
Right.
where they took different movements from it and sort of abstracted some of it, but it wasn't really very literal. And you can hear that extrinsic referral every once in a while in the music. He'll sort of try to imitate a 17th century sound, but it's not really very literal.
I think it's important what my little anecdote, I've gone through with the New York City Ballet, because they were in London doing Agon and Covent Garden. And I was backstage, and Balanchine came right up to me and started talking very soft. And he said, now you see this, you're going to do it right, you talk about the dance. See, they have to have a musical approach, and you don't have it.
A couple of things I do know about the scores is this is supposedly the first substantial 12-tone piece that Stravinsky wrote. Or
Yeah.
what?
This is the first one.
Yeah,
Was
this is
it?
the first one, and this,
No,
actually,
it's
this one, it's a broken, as I recall, I analyzed it a long, long time ago. But I think this first piece used 4 notes of the tone, of the row. Now, whether.
I don't know
the
much
fourth
about the.
one- As I recall, I may be mistaken on that.
It's his 10th or 12th piece.
Is it?
Yeah, 1954. 1954, 53. He started working with sets.
1957, but I
And-
wrote it.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
work is-
But funny thing is, it still sounds like Stravinsky.
Yeah.
You know,
And
it's
it's
just-
just-
it's only- it's a 12-tone
It's
piece.
just that tone, in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah.
But he doesn't use the tone, the 12 tones in any one of them, as I recall.
Hmm.
That's throughout.
Yeah. Shall I go on?
Yes.
All right, next movement.
Well, what about the ballet?
Where there's, it sounds like more 16th notes and higher pitched, and there's a tension that was going on in the music that would correspond to smaller movements in the
And
dance.
the repetition of the one.
Oh, that's interesting.
In
Yeah.
fact, the
energy
but-
tension
corresponded?
for me is heightened because of a distinction between the two rather than
Exactly.
alike.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
here I see the great formality, his focus on formality, meaning formalism or whatever word is correct in English. But if I only heard the music, I wouldn't even think of seeing this.
Yeah.
It
See,
was
and I got
much
the
more
same feeling
primitive.
when I
To me,
first
it's
saw it.
Martha Graham's music right here.
Yeah.
To use an old image, I mean, you know, one we understand. So it's an interesting juxtaposition between the formalism of what we're seeing and the disturbing, in a good sense, disturbing sounds of the music palette.
Boy, you guys are great. That's,
Juxtaposition.
if you had been my grad students, this would be a much better. That's the easy way. You get grad students to write your. John, yeah.
Well, the have you got the Babylon part of Apollo? The three goddesses all do that.
I do.
It's very simple music. It's just an octave and very not dissonant playing.
Yeah. Apollo is a really different aesthetic.
But
It's called a
he
white
uses
note
the
ballet.
same, absolutely the same movement.
Uh-huh.
He always wants the up part of it.
Yeah.
There's a very classical view of Batman.
Yeah.
Usually people, maybe modern dancers will do Batman, but they could do it on the offbeat and have the up on the offbeat. On the beat. But I think that whole texture of the music was like Italian opera, like an agitation.
Yeah.
It's not so new, it's so modern.
Interesting. I was just going to add one observation. I noticed when I was researching this, I looked at the rehearsal score, the two-piano rehearsal score for Etna, and it was full of notes, annotations. Who knows whose they were? I think some of them might have been Balanchine, some of them were rehearsal pianists to themselves. But there was a lot of simplification of the polymetric stuff for the dancers. They would just count right through it. I could imagine how hard this is to count. You know, it must be difficult. So they just simply broke it down to regular patterns.
That happened in Rite of Spring, I mean, as early as.
Yeah. You were next, yeah.
Yeah, I have, in watching the way they're doing their Batman, I didn't have to get the impression that it was weight and energy. I got the impression that they were more sort of floating Batman or something. I mean, certainly there was the rhythmic impulse, but an idea of weight and monumental effort on it. It wasn't conveyed to me as a different feeling. It's more like John said, like up or.
The music made the Batman seem much lighter than they normally seem. Yeah.
It's really interesting, Paul, to take your notions, your format here,
Yeah.
and to look at how you've compared two small sections of this dance back to back, and
Yeah.
how different those sections are.
Oh, yeah.
So that the dance, is kind of a fluid. The dance music relationship is kind of a fluid thing that moves through all these categories, sometimes including different intrinsic things, sometimes including different extrinsic things.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, being able to say, oh, well, this dance as a whole is related this way. I mean, we're 2 minutes and 20 seconds into it,
Oh,
and
that's-
already we're.
One of the reasons I picked this dance is because it's so dense. I mean, there is so much going on here. Even for a Stravinsky-Balanchine collaboration, it's just really condensed. I think it was Balanchine who called it the IBM ballet, isn't that? Just took so long to figure out. Okay, I think the next thing I have is the duet, the male duet. Let's have a look at that. That's this is for the start of this choreographic canon until the second entry of the musical canon. That's what it is in the beginning. But here it's bang on. So the correspondences are very literal here. Any other comments about this section? Gee, I'm out of time. I was going to get to Green Table and the extrinsic sequence. I don't want to take up any of Joe's time. So I guess I better stop now.
Go ahead, Paul, if you want to go 15 more minutes, that's fine.
Really?
Yeah, sure.
I'll take another 5 or so. I'll get into another choreography here. So I wanted to get into the other category of relationships. Yeah. Yeah. Green Table.
Yeah, Green Table.
Yeah, and what I'm more interested in the musical archetype. What did
Tango.
A tango. Yeah.
passion.
Why do you think he would have chosen a tango?
Passion.
Because
it's a passionate interplay.
Yeah, what is a tango? It's a love
Passion.
duet, usually, right? Yeah. Yeah, foreplay, exactly. You got it. Yeah.
There is sort of an element of violence to the tango.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that image comes out of early film or
Yeah.
Paul, it very much gives the feeling, because of the use of the tango, it very much gives the feeling that the group is in love with each other.
Yeah.
That they're all, as a group, buddy, we love each other.
Enemies in name only.
And he plays, he plays with that slightly choreographic routine where they're applauding for each other as, one of them gets up and does something, and that kind of self-love is stress through this archetypal relationship that you're talking about.
I did a little research into the tango, just, I didn't know much about it. Let me just read the paragraph. The tango was then, in the early 30s, a popular social dance. Originating in Argentina, it was a love duet performed by couples in tight embrace, characterized by violent erotic movement and abrupt rhythmic and dynamic contrasts. So he sticks to it pretty much choreographically. Tango texts were often very negative in tone, and the music was frequently in the minor mode. Let's see, yeah, that's about it. So it kind of follows true to form, isn't it?
It's wonderful when he goes up to see, go to that middle battle part when they go practically and kind of jump up on the table, threaten each other, and form battalion. And it goes into C sharp. The tango's in C major, it goes to the other
Yeah,
major.
through contrary motion in the octaves.
Yeah, it's wonderful use of tonality there. But it's not at all a sexual thing. I know that. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get the duplicity of ambassador.
Right. I think that's the most
All
obvious.
the politeness and they mean more back.
Right.
When you unmask them, they're all wearing masks. When you unmask them, they're for war, because they don't want to fight themselves.
We had a comment over here.
Just about the gestural nature of it, how the gestures imply certain things, and in the music, just using a tango, you're already making impressions, at least I was, about, well, this is tango music, and there's certain gestures, almost like the Del Sartre sort of stuff with the,
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
Also, the fact that it's two piano, it sounds like late 19th century salon music, And that has its own kind of implications.
Palm chord.
What's that?
Sort of palm chord idea.
Yeah. Okay,
And
now I'm really out of time. One more question.
I was just going to say, for me, the green table represents like the neutrality of the earth and sort of the middle ground on which they intrude.
Right. I think it actually referred to the diplomatic tables are always green back in those days, the bargaining tables. Yeah.
Just in a more symbolic way.
Yeah, that's
Pool table, my first
yeah,
impression.
right. You can see that it is.
Negotiate.
In this case, the archetypal relationships are all important in the music as well as the choreography. They're just as strongly in the score. Yeah.
I would just, where do you get a copy of the Green Table? We tried for 2 years to get a copy of it.
Well, you don't want to get it where we got it.
Televised.
Thank you very much.
Thank